Well, weather-wise, pretty interesting week to talk about, and I'll get to that in just a second. But before I do, if you were up later in the evening or early morning this past weekend, we had another visit from Aurora. The Northern Lights were here, and actually this was taken late Sunday evening. Uh, Mother Nature cooperated with a really pretty dry week with few clouds. It was just a wonderful thing. We the Northern Lights were visible quite a bit further south than they typically are. There was a lot of this pink reddish color to the aurora, and it was a 2-for-1 bonus, as most of you probably know. It was also a meteor shower going on at the same time. So if you were looking for one, you could have seen the other. There was a lot of meteors, so it was a great night to be looking at the sky here. And that's again, especially for those of us in more southern parts of the state where we don't see this as often. It's been a great season for the Northern Lights. Well, I mentioned an interesting week. Starting on the left-hand side, a couple of major, I think, take-homes here. One is that for the upper Midwest, for the Great Lakes, and certainly for Michigan, a solidly cooler than normal week. And by departures here for the week itself, between 3 and 6 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than normal. And it was, again, talking about the second week of August, climatologically one of the warmest weeks typically of the season. But we have had, in general, a warmer than normal growing season. And last week was probably, or arguably, at least in terms of a departure, the relatively coolest week of the season. And what we're going to see here as we look at the forecast is the pattern that led to this, the jet stream change. We're going to see more of it than we expected earlier anyway. So I'll get to that in just a second. The other big news, of course, for many of you, especially in the southern part of the state, look in the middle panel here, our precipitation, we have white here. So there were much of the southern half of lower Michigan was completely dry for 7 days. That also has not happened very much here during, especially in southern lower Michigan, with the first week that we've had like that in some time. You can also see in the northern part of the state, we did where the green is here in the middle, many areas 1/2 to 1 inch. And the key thing there is that those are some of the driest areas of the state, especially up in western upper Michigan. And actually the water and the rainfall was beneficial. But again, I think the biggest news is that in areas, some of which had record or near record wettest July on record, we did have an extended period here, the first one in many, many, many weeks. Of the growing season. So big development. Far right-hand side here, even with that drier than normal week, these are 30-day departures from normal expressed as a percentage. Here, you can still see much above normal rainfall. And again, it looks back at the heavy rain we had in late July. And still added into that total. But also note, as you move north and west towards especially western upper Michigan, there are many areas that had less than half, some cases less than a quarter of normal precipitation during that time frame. So a big range of conditions across Michigan at the current time, ranging from still very, very wet, or certainly above normal for moisture for this time of the year to too little moisture in the far northwestern part of the state. And as a result of that, if we look at the big picture here, on the right-hand side, with our vegetation drought response index, the greens here indicate rain-fed landscapes that are wetter than normal and have relatively little limitations with water. The browns and the yellows here are areas that are too dry. And this looks exactly like what you just saw, especially with that percent of normal precipitation. And again, especially southwestern lower Michigan into the thumb. Really deep greens here. And that's a reflection of all of that rain that's fallen over the last couple of months. And in contrast, as we move north and west, we have areas in the western UP that are really pretty dry and lacking water. If we look officially at the U.S. Drought Monitor and current classifications, we are seeing some transition, but the yellows here indicate the D0 or abnormally dry category. Just again at the one of those areas you're looking at with some concern because of dryness, and you can see some of again the northern and northwestern parts of the state. About 8% of Michigan by area right now in that D0 which is a little higher than it's been. But I think the other big take home here, if we look at this in a bigger picture, look at the upper Midwest, look at most of the Corn Belt. Very, very, very little issue with lack of water here across much of the Corn Belt region. You can see some problems with drought to our south and east over the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic, and also some far west out over the Great Plains. But for the upper Midwest and for the Corn Belt, it's been a wet year. And in some cases, well, it's certainly a wetter than normal year. And that we'll leave it at that. So that with that context, degree days totals here. Even with the cooler than normal week we've had here, we still have surpluses of degree days in southern and eastern parts of the state, but we have some increasing deficits in the north. And that's what the summary really here is, especially looking at the right-hand side here. As of the middle of August, you can see we've got some deficits. They're not large deficits, but maybe 50 to 100 units in western upper Michigan. That's the largest where we're the furthest behind. It's not that much. It's just a few days behind normal, but we're still several days to maybe as much as a week ahead of normal phenologically in the southeast. And you can see Michigan sort of along a line or a gradient here from deficits to our north and west, transitioning to surpluses as we go south and east from Michigan. We're sort of in between that, but that pattern we've seen for much of the season. But note, especially given it's the second week in August and one of the warmer months and warmer weeks of the month, the growing season climatologically, it did make a difference a little bit on this chart or on this graphic, but most areas still ahead by at least several days, and probably, well, even with the forecast, probably will continue. So where are we headed? Well, we've talked about ultimately over the last couple of weeks, expectations for a return of warmer than normal weather. And I think the bottom line is here, it looks like that, yes, that's still in the outlook, but it's going to be delayed. And that and I'm showing you here a couple panels, lots of stuff, but the bottom line is that the upper air pattern that we've had recently here for the last week with the cooler than normal, and you can look down in there in the middle here, this big troughing feature over the Great Lakes. This is what's forecast for much of the upcoming week and maybe even better part of 2 weeks. That wasn't there before. It was there before, but it gave way to another pattern, a warmer pattern over the upper Midwest. Now, the most recent guidance is suggesting a persistence. And if this looks familiar, this pattern, and notice with that trough, you look in the upper left-hand side here, these are temperature anomalies from normal, with the reds and oranges being above normal or warmer than normal conditions, and the blues being opposite. Well, look at underneath that trough. You've got all of that cooler than normal conditions. So this again is what's forecast for the upcoming week, 1 to 2 weeks. And if it looks familiar, well, it should, because here's the one we showed last week for the last week. And again, you don't see this very often, where an upper air pattern and the temperature pattern, but they're very, very similar. And again, that's a little bit unexpected given what we had in the outlooks of certainly last week. But I think the bottom line is now an expected continuation or persistence of this pattern longer than had been anticipated earlier. So again, they're sort of a deja vu type of thing, but a very similar pattern to where we've been setting up once again, especially this weekend, and then continuing into next week, and probably a little bit even beyond that. So we look at the forecast. We have a major weather system, the major weather system of the upcoming week, approaching here from the south and west. It's an area of low pressure out over the northern plains into the upper Midwest with a couple frontal boundaries here. That's going to slowly make its way across the state over the next couple days. And the pattern you just saw, the forecast pattern with formation of an upper trough across the Great Lakes, that's going to sit there this weekend and lead to an extended period of, quote, unsettled weather with frequent chances, or well, at least lots of chances for showers and thunderstorms over an extended period. And that's basically for the short term. That is definitely our forecast. Rainfall with this likely will begin. It already has, actually. We've had a couple sprinkles in the far southwestern corner. Down here in the radar, you can see where some of this activity is. Recently, over the last half hour, it's slowly making its way to the east. So we will see increasing clouds today with rainfall developing from west to east, especially this afternoon and into this evening, and even into the eastern parts of the state here by overnight into the early morning hours tomorrow. Looking at fairly widespread quarter-inch amounts initially with this. It will be primarily in the form of showers, but there will be some embedded thunderstorms, especially down in the southwestern portion of the state. And by tomorrow, not much of a change in the map. You can see the frontal boundary gets closer here, but we have a fairly strong chances statewide for more showers and thunderstorms tomorrow, and then even lingering into Saturday. Is that again that low pressure, surface low pressure? You can see it's only made it from Minnesota here this morning into northern lower Michigan by Saturday morning, and there'll still be some lingering threat of showers even on Sunday. So we're looking at an extended 2 to 3+ day period of rainfall. And again, this is the major rainfall event of certainly of the upcoming week. After that moves through on Sunday, we are then looking at fair, cooler, drier weather developing by the beginning part of next week, and then continuing on into next week. After this, after tomorrow or to today, tomorrow, and Saturday, Sunday with an extended threat of rainfall. Not looking at rainfall again, probably till late next work week. So we are looking again at drier conditions for a good chunk of the work week next week. But if we look in the rain gauge here and think about this, we've just come through, even in the southern parts of the state where it's been so wet, we're looking at widespread 1/2 to 1 inch totals. So I think one of the keys here is the rainfall with this system should be fairly widespread. When they're not as scattered as we've seen in the past. And note that even in northern parts of the state, which have been drier, you've got some areas maybe picking up over an inch, maybe 1.5 inches as much here. So the highest amounts probably in the northern part of the state. And again, this is all reflects the rainfall expected here later today through Saturday and Sunday. So again, quite a bit of certainly a healthy rainfall coming here for most all areas before it gets drier once again early next week. Potential evapotranspiration and our evaporative demand rates here with cooler temperatures expected coming up next week. Now, I didn't talk about temperatures too much. We'll be up in upper 70s north to the low 80s for highs today and probably tomorrow as well. Those will probably be the two warmest days of the upcoming week, and then a gradually cooling off once again as that trough comes in from Canada into the Great Lakes region. Mid to upper 70s for highs by the beginning of next week and staying there. Low temperatures generally from the 60s here tonight, overnight tonight, then falling back into the 50s by this weekend and early next week. So we'll be moving back to a cooler than normal. It won't be huge departure, but it will be a few degrees each day cooler than normal. As a result of that, our potential evapotranspiration rates will be a little bit below normal. You can see these are weekly totals forecast here through next Wednesday evening. This translates to about 0.13 to 0.16 inches per day on average. Again, which is for the middle of August to later August, a little bit below what the climatology tells us. And again, most of that is because of the cooler temperatures, air temperatures that are expected. So in areas where you've been lacking water and so forth, again, at least the water demand from the atmosphere will be a little bit lower than it typically is at this time of the year. So where are we headed? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're expecting more of the same developing. And if this is the 6 to 10 day out, 8 to 14 day outlook is very similar to this with a little bit less amplification. But the jet stream, look at this big trough over eastern North America with northwesterly flow across Michigan. That's a real sign there, and it's just like what we saw. We looked at those forecast conditions here for the next week. It indicates more of the same in week 2, 1 to 2 weeks out, and possibly even a little bit beyond that. But notice here in the upper right, you've got a large area in the Great Lakes of cooler than normal weather, and that's I think the most number one take home or profound impact of that jet stream change. Very amplified jet stream flow, by the way, for the middle of August. And typically what's the heart of our sort of our stable summer season. We typically don't see large ridges and troughs like that. But this pattern definitely gives more confidence to this outlook um, given how large it is or how high amplitude it is. And in the 8 to 14 day time frame, similar, a little bit less amplified, but the same message: normal to below normal mean temperatures. Now, also note another take home here. Also, given where we are with that ridge just off to our west, probably a little drier than normal as well. So cooler and drier is the direction we're looking at here, I think, for much of the rest of the latter part of August, moving into the end of the month. That again is somewhat new or unexpected. We do anticipate a return of warmer than normal temperatures at some point, but we had expected it to occur earlier. So again, this pattern that we have now, new development indicates more cooler than normal. So I think that's fairly major news. We will have next week, by the way, we'll have a new outlook or long lead extended outlook. Don't anticipate many changes in that. Again, it was for warmer than normal conditions for the later part of the growing season into the fall. And I think that's probably what we'll see, but we'll have a look at that next week briefing. So summarizing here, again, an unsettled period that we're moving into with fairly widespread rain expected across the state over the next few days, and then a gradual cooling trend and drier as we move into next week. And with that, I'm going to wrap up and remind you of our virtual breakfast for next week on the 22nd. And we'll have Dr. Kurt Steinke back with us here. And Kurt's going to be talking about Lyme and soil amendments and how what its role is for soil nutrient management. So don't miss that. Again, that's a week from today on the 22nd. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Phil to talk about RUP credits. Thanks.